This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with Dr. Sarah Barry, Assistant Professor of Health Services Management at Trinity College Dublin. We chat about her unusual career path that took in Bolivia, Honduras and India before becoming what she calls an accidental academic at Trinity College. We chatted about the health system in Ireland, her role with Slainte Care, how the world coped with COVID, and which is the best country to be in if you were unlucky enough to get sick. Let's hear from Sarah. Sarah Barry, it's been a while.
It has, yeah. I think maybe 2 years, something like that.
Yeah. I'm guessing, was it Keshk that we met or was it Rowley's that we met?
No, it was Keshk, actually, because right now I'm sitting in County Leitrim in a place called Kesh Carrigan. And I think I remember that striking a chord at the time. We were kind of going, how can it be Keshk as opposed to Kesh?
Yeah, and I think I would absolutely do anything right now to meet you for an early bird in Keshk and shoot around the corner.
To Searson's for a pint.
Yeah, to Searson's for a pint, grab a fantastic, they do the bring your own wine in Keshk and get a really nice big bottle of red in the fantastic off-license around the corner. And that's the way life was. And I haven't been there since March 2020.
No.
With the way things going, I'm not sure when that's going to happen again.
It might be a while yet.
Yeah. It's funny. It's all different.
Although I think little by little, I think we are beginning to get our head around the idea that we're going to live with this coronavirus or its variants for some time. And you feel a shift in the air, I think, where people are sort of saying, okay, we just need to get on with life.
Yeah. And living with COVID or whatever that looks like, but living with these new habits that we're after absolutely locking into. We thought they were going to be for 3 or 4 weeks, but that became months. And no, this is just your normal life, isn't it? We've got used to it. Yeah, it's all different.
You don't go out you as you're walking out the door, you put your hand in your pocket and you go, have I got a mask?
Yeah, totally.
And you used to look at people from other parts of the world at one stage in an airport years back with masks on, looking at them as if they were kind of going, what the hell are this crowd at? You know?
The weird Chinese bunch coming off the plane with all of their masks or whatever. And you'd never be throwing your eyes up, oh my God, how silly they are, But
well, we're all there now.
Totally. And
they were ahead of the curve.
And it's not the only thing that's changed since I met you last, because you have a fine new job for yourself, at least. So do you want to tell the listener who the hell you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Sarah and I work in Trinity College Dublin, and I'm a researcher, I suppose. In principle, I'm an educator. My current job title is Assistant Professor of Health Services Management at the Centre for Health Policy and Management at Trinity. But I also have a couple of hats I wear in that role. So I'm director of our centre, the Centre for Health Policy and Management. I also am the director of our MSc in Health Services Management. And for my sins, I am also the director of the National Sphere Programme, which is a Health Research Board funded programme that is run across all the higher education institutions, or at least most of them in Ireland. And the whole point of it is to train people to PhD level in what PHHSR, which stands for Population Health Policy as well, and Health Services Research. So it's academic life is full of these weird and wonderful acronyms, and this is one of them. But the general idea of the Sphere program is to, and it's been running now for about 14, 15 years, is to build a great cadre of, really highly skilled researchers that are kind of serving the Irish health and social care system in a whole variety of roles, from the academic, service, private and public sectors. So, yeah, that's what I do.
And while health is kind of a big topic at the moment, and
It
we
is
all have our
indeed.
opinions on health and health systems and the HSE and all that kind of good stuff. And what I'd
Yeah.
like to do is maybe get to that place with you during the course of our conversation. But what
Okay.
I'd like to do is to give the listener a little bit of an idea of who Sarah is. I mean, the real nitty gritty. Who the hell are you and where did you come from? You know, when you're a little Colleen.
I'm Stardust, Greg.
Yeah,
Stardust.
we know that. We know that.
Like it all, like us all.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Stillorgan in County Dublin, and
Posh.
Sorry?
Posh.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people say that, but it kind of annoys me. You know, I grew up in the 70s, 80s in Stillorgan. You know, I was in a housing estate. We ran around like any kids, you know, on an estate. We played, we got covered in mud. People say that. I don't know. At the time when I was growing up, the particular area, the particular housing estate I was growing up in was quite newly built. And so it was a young estate, young population. You know, it didn't feel posh, let me put it that way.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
it was. Maybe we're all fish swimming in our own water and we don't know. But certainly none of the kind of cultural overtones that are about today, they weren't the same at that. Certainly when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Got involved in all the usual, you know, you were singing in the local choir and down in the parish, or you were, you know, involved in some community sports program, or, you know.
Yeah, of course, of
can I
course.
say?
I'm only pulling your leg.
All that usual stuff. Am I too defensive?
Yeah. Well, you know, I just asked the question. No, I did say posh, didn't I? I did say posh, so I kind of opened the door.
Yeah.
Your mum and dad, what do they do?
So my mum, who's about to turn 80, actually, the end of the month. So my mum was originally a hairdresser, and which was very useful when we were kids growing up, and indeed as teenagers, etc. Then we got to a point where we said, no, you can't cut our hair anymore. But my mum qualified as a hairdresser and worked at that for a couple of years before she dedicated herself to bringing us all up.
You've trusted her with your hair during lockdown when we couldn't go near hairdressers.
Well, she lives a little bit away from me, so that wasn't very practical because it's in County Wicklow and I was in County Leitrim, and you could only go 2 miles from home. So that didn't really work out. In fact, we cut each other's hair here at home, which, you know, had somewhat disastrous effects. Although I always think I did a fairly good job having a mum who was a hairdresser, but my other half mightn't agree. And my dad was a publisher. He started out in PR, actually. Your own business, and he worked back in the day for an organization called ANCO.
Oh yeah,
and but then he set up in I think 1974. He set up a magazine called Irish Marketing Journal, which is still running to this day.
Yeah, I get it's all online now, of course. I get
it's all online.
Comes in every month, I think. Yeah.
You know, he was in that world of marketing and advertising and PR and all that sort of stuff. He had originally started out working in the Irish Times. So his father was the head photographer in the Irish Times for years, and one of my uncles worked there. And so family always involved in media and indeed the arts. Great aunt Billy Barry, and, you know, all of that line of things. And they were a theatrical crowd, etc. So my dad was a publisher. We grew up with him back in the day with a huge big board in front of him, kind of, you know, going back from the typesetters and with cow glue building pages and all this kind of stuff for magazines. And he had a range of titles over the years that kind of came and went, but the Marketing Journal was the one that sustained. He had for quite a while when I was a teenager, which was really great. He had a magazine called Irish Boats and Yachting, which was fantastic because we used to get great opportunities to sail other people's boats, or, you know, get a trial of. I remember one summer we had a trial of a sunfish, which nobody else had, you know, and we were sailing that around the place, etc. So yeah, he was an ad man in the Irish version of that.
And probably had a glamorous enough time for an industry like that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly when he would tell stories of, back in the 60s and 70s and what they were doing and how it was expanding and developing and, a lot of obviously pre-digital, but, loads and loads of things happening. And Ireland, what was happening in Ireland at the time, I think it was a very exciting industry. If you think of coming back off things like, the Lamass inspired initiatives of the 50s and whatever in Ireland, trying to open up the EEC and all of that, I think the whole world of the advertising agency, etc. I mean, maybe not quite John Hamm in New York, Mad Avenue, but Madison Avenue. But I mean, in fact, funnily enough, when that series came out, I remember saying to my father, "God, you must love this." Not at all. He hated it. So it wasn't a bit like that at all. I tell you what was like that was the smoking. I'm afraid it was an industry where there was plenty of smoking, and unfortunately, my father was a heavy smoker most of his life.
Tell me, what were the conversations around the dinner table?
Oh, what were the conversations? So I have 3 sisters. I'm the second, 1 older, 2 younger. So there were 6 of us. So conversations around the dinner table, I think would have been were very lively, noisy. A lot of the time, I mean, I grew up in a household where we would discuss ad campaigns, which is I found in my later life was quite unusual. But I think politics, plenty of discussion around politics. My mum was involved for quite a long time in an organisation called the Experiment in International Living.
Yes.
And how that kind of manifested in our lives was from a very young age. We had people come and stay with us and live with us for varying periods of time, from a week right up to 3 months. We used to have an American student who would come, not the same one. I mean, for I don't know, we had about, over the period of my growing up, we had maybe 5 or 6 of them who came and lived with us for 3 months and went to school with us and kind of became part of the family. And I think that internationalized us a lot, which was probably unusual. When I think of it, I remember sitting down, for example, to a Japanese meal, probably in the mid-70s, with raw egg and the whole thing. And I don't think that was very typical. We had a lovely Italian girl came and lived with us for a couple of months and went to school. We had, and then my mum herself went, I remember she went to both Holland and Switzerland, as a kind of an ambassador for this organization and some of the exchanges were very short. I remember we had one guy. It's a funny story in our family where we had a guy who came, youngish man who came from Chile, and to me that was just extraordinary. I was like fascinated, and I remember sitting with the guy for hours and asking him so many questions that the poor fellow nearly collapsed with exhaustion. But so yeah, all kinds of different people. So I think that influenced our dinner table conversations in that there was, lots of varied kind of perspectives, interests. And then, my mum was extremely interested in cooking. She's a fabulous cook. And so we always in our family, still to this day, food and what we eat and, the quality and what's going on and what this recipe might be or the other would always have been a topic of conversation. And then we were 4 girls, so there was plenty of fighting and arguing and giving out and complaining about this one or that one or the other one.
Who's wearing my clothes?
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, I would say, listen, we absolutely and utterly we're not the Waltons, but I would say a lively dinner table.
Yeah. It's funny actually what you're saying about the internationalization experience. We used to have foreign students in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
And that was a source of income for Mum. She
Yes.
took boarders during the winter and she took students during the summer. So we nearly always had like a permanent UCC or a CIT student kind of boarding in the house when there wasn't loads of student accommodation, in the same
fantastic.
way that they have now. And we would have had the foreign students then at the summer for 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
Yeah. No, I think a win-win in that sense. I also think, the fringe benefit, certainly for ourselves, was I really do think it certainly put wings on my shoes in lots of ways. Just I would say that internationalization in so many ways, and just maybe even to kind of take it, just maybe giving us an education in a global perspective.
Yeah. I actually did a podcast with the man who heads up the Experiment in International Living.
Oh.
They're headquartered in Cork. It was one of the earlier episodes I had, and I thought it was quite fascinating.
How interesting! Because you're the only person I've ever met who actually have heard of that organization. I didn't even know if they still existed.
They do. And tell me, when the young Sarah is sitting in school and for whatever reason the teacher has lost your attention and you start to daydream, where does your head go?
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, my big interests when I was a kid were, I was quite involved in sport. I played hockey and all that kind of stuff. I was really interested in poetry and philosophy. As a very young kid, I started reading all the Greek mythology.
As an average child does.
I even appeared, believe it or not, on Mike Murphy at the time when I was about 8 or 9. Mike Murphy ran a program during the summer called Move Around on RTE1. And it was like a little, kind of hour in the morning kind of chit-chatty thing. But he would always bring on a couple of kids. I don't know how it happened. I can't really remember how it happened. I think I applied or something. But anyway, he had me on the program. Unfortunately, somehow through the mists of time, the cassette tape of the recording got lost, which makes me very sad because I kept it for a long time, but it got lost somehow or other in my 20s, I think. But anyway, I do remember that he was asking me all about, the Greek myths, the Greek mythology and stuff like that, because I was mad interested in that. So I think that kind of translated in as I grew up into an interest in philosophy, and I ended up going and studying philosophy. But, going back to my school days, I think it manifested probably in an interest in poetry. And, I was reading biographies of political thinkers and philosophical type people and things like that. Yeah. And, also just simple little things. I was mad into Liverpool Football Club. And,
hey, well done.
At that stage, yeah, I know, I'm afraid I just can't do the Man U thing, even to this day. And I don't really follow football anymore. But it's kind of in your DNA, isn't it?
Well, to be honest with you, even in business and life, if I know someone's a Man U supporter, I just don't trust them. It's like there's a defect somewhere, and like, no, I don't. No. Having said that, I have met a few nice people, and I just reckon they're closet Liverpool fans, and for whatever reason, they can't admit to it.
But back in the day, and funny actually, was it just before Christmas? One of my heroes of the time, Ray Kennedy, died. Actually, he was a very elderly gentleman at that stage. But and he played, and Steve Highway and all that kind of gang. I'm probably giving my age profile away here now, but the arch enemy for me at that stage was Nottingham Forest.
Yeah,
they were with Brian Clough. They were like, to me, they were the devil's spawn. Like, they were just hits.
Well, wasn't there one famous match around that time? Did we beat them? Was it 4-0 or 6-0 or something? And that seemed to be a big changing of the guard. I think they had broken whatever was going on with Notts Forest, and they drove on from there. And then,
that's
of course,
right. They went on European Championship, something like 3 times in a row or something.
Yeah.
Listen.
And then we didn't win a league for 30 years, but we sorted that out as well last year. Actually, well, we're having that conversation, and after drifting into maybe even leadership, what do you make of Klopp?
Oh, my goodness. Well, as I said, I'm not very informed to answer that question because I don't really follow football very closely anymore. I probably follow rugby now more closely. I got a bit disenchanted, I suppose, somewhere along the way with the Premiership and all that kind of thing. But from the little knowledge I have of him, I think he is doing an amazing job. I think he seems to be very connected with his players. He's probably one of those managers that, it's kind of the players will go the extra mile. He seems a very personal, connected kind of a person, very actually emotionally intelligent, which isn't always what you see in. And I've probably just focused in on that because I've noticed it in him, in the little I know. As a strategist and all the rest of it, I can't say a lot because I really don't follow it as closely as I did once upon a time when I was a kid. But you know what? Liverpool was, as you said, the lost team for a very long time, and they're back, in the driving seat in lots of ways. So you'd have to attribute that to, as Man U go through its various searches for another Alex Ferguson, and it's interesting. I did my PhD on organizational learning and change, and I find it very interesting seeing that, when there's been such a strong leader for, the identity of the club was so bound up with Ferguson that it's just that natural curve of losing its way. Don't follow the football closely, but as a leadership kind of a cameo or something, or I don't know what the word, a case study. It's actually a really interesting one, how they've chopped and changed, and looked like Saltshire was going to do the business for a while there, but not so.
Yeah,
anyway.
No, he's a huge leader, and in exactly the same way that you can identify where something ends up losing its way. In his case, you can see very important moments where that team and that club started to find its way again. And there were little gestures and games and incredible press conferences that he'd give, where he seems to have an instinct for saying the right thing at the right time, the right gesture to the fans during the right match, and not being afraid to take them on. And even down to something simple like COVID, and I know we'll talk about that in a while. It's a bit of a big deal now, and you can see all the stuff with Djokovic getting into Australia and what have you.
Yeah.
But, it's the transfer window in football at the moment, and he was asked, would a player being vaccinated be a criteria he'd worry about or whatever? He's so clever. Well, first of all, he didn't get into the big hot political mess by giving opinions one way or the other. But then again, he actually did. And he said, this isn't about vaccinations or not, about trusting science or not. He said, this is about solidarity. And he said, in Liverpool Football Club, we are in this together. So as a group and as a team, every single person here realizes that we're in this together. And we've decided that the best thing is for everyone to go on that path of vaccinations. And we do it for solidarity, and we put our own kind of personal things aside. And I thought, wow.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. But to me, it's that classic thing of, I'm not going to be pushed into your binary formula here. I'm actually going to just shift the goalpost totally. Excuse the
absolutely. He's just wonderful, and he has been from the very first moment. But anyway, we went totally away from where we should be with our conversation.
Oh yeah, but I've learned a lot from what you've been, because I haven't been as close a watcher, but I think maybe I got something of the essence.
Tell me your choices in terms of education and following that scratchy interest about the Greek philosophers and everything. Where did that bring you?
Well, it brought me all kinds of places, actually. I often say a couple of things. So what do I say? I often say to my students, I'm a very accidental academic, and I am. If somebody had said to me when I was leaving school, with what I might add was a very, very pedestrian leaving cert, if somebody had said to me, well, you'll be working as a professor and assistant professor and a researcher in Trinity, I would have just laughed my head off. So I certainly didn't see that one coming. So an accidental academic, I often say. And yet in other ways, I actually think that was always going to, I'm curious, I'm interested, I love engaging my brain. I'm a thinker, I'm a reflector, it's kind of who I am. And so therefore it was probably always in the cards or the stars or whatever way you want to put it. I started doing my studies a little bit late. I was a mature student. I was 24 when I first went to university. I didn't intend to go to university at all. I had an opportunity to go, and I started studying theology.
So tell me those last years, the 18 to 24, what were you up to?
Oh, what was I up to? So I went overseas. So I told you I got wings on my shoes as a young one. And I remember my elder sister apparently told my mother at some stage, that one, the minute she leaves school, she'll be gone. And indeed, that was the case.
I'm off.
I'm off. And look, I found a way to make it happen. This was a kind of a gap year before gap years were invented. So I'm talking about 1984. And the end of 84, I went off with a pal from school, the support of the congregation that ran the school that I went to. And they had communities all over the world, but we went to Bolivia in South America. And they had this huge big team of Bolivian people working in what's called the high valley of Cochabamba. up in the Andes, and I worked there with teachers primarily, but there were a whole range of various different, professionals and whatever working in the area. And it was a huge, big community development program. And I used to walk from village to village through the Andes with this Bolivian woman. She was a teacher, and I used to work with the kids. And I had to learn Spanish, but then the kids I worked with were Quechuan speakers. So I had to learn a very rudimentary, which I don't remember. I remember I still speak Spanish, but I don't remember the little bits of Quechua that I learned. But we used to do all kinds of things with them, like, I don't know, team development skills and scouting and reading and writing, and in Spanish, obviously, because their parents were very interested in them learning Spanish. So I went overseas and came back to Ireland, and I worked for a while. I was a bit ill when I came back, so I lost about a year. When I was in Bolivia, I got typhus, unfortunately. And so when I came home, I was sick for about a year.
That period of time and that experience, did that shape you in any way?
Oh, tremendously, Greg. Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was 18 years of age and I went off to Bolivia. And as I say, it was a kind of a gap year before they were invented, in the sense that there was no email. A letter would take a month to traverse from Ireland to Bolivia or back again. So it was a 2-month feedback loop. I spoke to home on the phone about twice for about 3 minutes because it was expensive and, couldn't do that, etc. And also at that stage, Bolivia was very, not a globalized country. I lived and worked up in the Andes. I saw things. I remember I worked in one village where miners were mining tin. And I remember, I still have photos up on the shelf here somewhere, actually. I remember very much walking around and at the time thinking, this is what famine Ireland looked like. I remember, just these shacks made of mud and people living, hand to mouth. And I suppose I saw poverty, like I had never experienced before, but also exposure to a new language, a new culture that wasn't westernized at that stage. I'm sure if I went back now, there'd be a heck of a lot more Western influence, but at that stage it wasn't. Walking out into, villages in the Andes and relying on local maize farmers and women spinning wool with like spinning wheel. Not, I don't mean like a proper spinning wheel. I mean literally on, I don't know what it's called, like a kind of a twirling thing like they had in Ireland back in the day. And just living with these people and relying on them to feed us and, oftentimes show us the way or help us, or, had all kinds of experiences, funny, amazing, challenging. I remember at one stage I got sick. I think it was at the beginning when I got the typhus, but it wasn't really diagnosed. And I remember all the local women coming and they were adamant that they were going to heal me by giving me urine to drink.
Oh, lovely.
And I had like a heavy fever and I was kind of trying to raise up from the bed going, no, it's okay. And their response, like caring, loving response was, don't worry, we'll make it ourselves.
Oh my God.
That's a slightly kind of humorous story, but at the same time, just that it totally influenced how I am and who I am. And, at a very young age, coming from, a small little island on the western seaboard of Europe, I just had this extraordinary experience of sharing and living with and depending on, a different country, people who had a completely different worldview and experience to me.
And was it the sickness that finished that experience? Like potentially you could have continued there, could you?
Well, not really. I mean, it was we went as kind of volunteers, and so it was a year-long kind of program. So we were always going to be coming home. I had to come home and work out. That was a sort of, as I say, it was just after leaving school. It was a couple of months after leaving school, so I had to come home and work out, well, what's my next step? Subsequently, I did next step back into that type of a world again, in that I was an APSO direct assignee, and I worked, that's why I mentioned Honduras. I worked for over 3 years in Honduras with rice farmers, helping them run and develop a whole big rice kind of growing and processing project. So yeah, it did influence, and I worked in India for a while as well. So, it definitely, for my kind of early adulthood, That was a strong trajectory. And in fact, the reason I went and did a master's degree, once again, why I say I'm an accidental academic, is that, it was practice that drove me, because I was working overseas in Honduras, and I sort of realized, well, if I want to go into, develop this and go into management, I need to have a master's. And that's how I ended up doing a master's in anthropology. And it was actually a particular strand of anthropology. It was in development anthropology. So it was very much coming off the back of working in overseas aid projects, rural development, that kind of thing. So my kind of academic engagements have always been somewhat driven by, for want of a better way of putting it, living in the real world and actually thinking, okay, how do I actually take this a step further?
Yeah. And in a funny way, you mentioned your dad being an ANCO, which was all about learning very, very practical skills, wasn't it, to go out and do something in the real world.
Indeed.
So while it was academia, I think it had a very sharp agenda there.
Yeah, absolutely. And even what I do now, what we do in the centre it's applied research. I always kind of say to my colleagues, I'm kind of like a round or a square peg in a round or a square hole, in the sense that my growing up in academia, in academic work, was in the humanities. So philosophy, theology, those, what one might think is a bit more abstract, although I love philosophy, and I always believe that, philosophers change the world much more than we actually realize a lot of the time. But having said that, I now work in a world of the social sciences, and what we do is very applied. We're doing research all the time in collaboration and cooperation with, health service managers, with the Department of Health, with clinicians and practitioners working in the field. So, the leitmotif of what we try to do is to make a difference, bringing our particular piece to the party, but nonetheless really wanting to make an impact and support and help the system to change. So it's very applied. And I suppose even when I ended up doing, once again, after several years of working in community development work here in Ireland, this time I decided to do a PhD, or I got the opportunity applied for a PhD and got the opportunity in Trinity. And I did it on organisational learning and change. So, and it was coming off the back of working in community development and a particular experience in that area, where I saw big organizations and institutions that somehow, my words at the time were, kind of cannibalized themselves. So they sort of set you to do an agenda and yet don't really enable you to do that agenda in a kind of coherent way. And oftentimes it's the political factions, it's the difference, it's the sometimes institutionalism, the lack of transparency. There's all kinds of dynamics to that, which we could talk about. But essentially that was a driving force. And I went and I did my PhD on organizational learning. So how is it that, and that hugely influences what I do now, in terms of our health service. One of those big questions is, one of our big failures is implementation. And how is it that we're not learning? We're not great in this country at this idea of institutional change and learning. And that now we have big successes. It's not all dark, but it is one of the areas where we struggle. So I suppose for me, in some ways, I kind of think of myself as a practitioner firsthand. Although, and I always used to say that when I was doing my PhD, I always imagined that it was a preparation to go back to work again. I had been working, in facilitating groups through change and resourcing, training and development in the community. And, I never imagined that the PhD would bring me to what I'm doing now. And yet that practice-based approach has always been really, really important to me. And, always at the heart of what I'm trying to do, I think.
And it's probably that way with everyone. And that thing that I say to people about winning happy or whatever, that we are chiseling a life for ourselves. You try something, you change, you chisel away at it. You like something.
Well, I'm a great believer, Greg, it's well known and maybe a bit hackneyed, but I truly believe in that line from T.S. Eliot. It says we travel and we come back from the place from which we first began, and we know it for the first time. We travel from the place, whatever it is. He has this, I think it's in the four quartets. This circling around, the spiral kind of metaphor maybe of that we come back to the place where we began, but we know it for the first time. And I suppose it speaks to me of that sense of, you use the metaphor of chiseling, but I think when you look at your life story, and you kind of see those stepping stone moments. And I say I'm an accidental academic in one way, and I talk about the long and winding road, and who knew that you were going to be here when you started there. But on the other hand, I suppose maybe because we are human beings, with an inner integrity, hopefully, that somehow that kind of wins through, and you see that trajectory. You really only see it in hindsight, I suppose. So we take these kind of like this chat, a reflective moment when you look and you think back at that sort of deeper level. Maybe you kind of say, actually, there is a coherence here. And I have a kind of a little phrase I say to my niece who's 19 and, came through the COVID leaving cert last summer, and, challenging times for her and her group and her age group. It's very discombobulating. And I always say to her, the cream will rise to the top. And what I mean by that is that, try not to worry too much. What's your cream? What's your heart? You'll find your way. I worry about this generation being so anxious, and just that trust the process and trust yourself, maybe.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's probably far too philosophical for
I don't know
the stage of our discussion.
Yeah, and they'll probably bank this disproportionate experience, and for them, I think it is disproportionate, and use that in some positive way going forward. At least we hope they will.
Yeah, exactly.
And where you are now, I think one of the words you mentioned to me when we were chatting is about your ability to impact things. Could you describe the impact of what you do?
At the centre, we say we do three things. We do education, which is obvious enough. We do research. And then I said to you jokingly, on a good day, we hope we have impact. Yeah. And I think that's, to some extent, I suppose all researchers on a good day will hope that they produce evidence that's useful and brings enlightenment and insight. I work in a centre where what we're engaged with is very applied research, as I mentioned, and therefore we want that research to make a difference. In the kind of formal speak, we would say that we want the evidence that we generate or that we produce to be rigorous, to be well-grounded, to be based in international literature, et cetera, but also that it is accessible to policymakers, to decision makers, in ways that they can, to practitioners, in ways that they can actually use that evidence to inform what it is they're trying to do. So, for example, the obvious one is in the policy realm, and we work a lot in that area, and we work with the department and the HSE and and we worked with the Oireachtas committee developing the Slainte Care report. And that was a tremendous opportunity indeed to do that, to work with those decision makers, to generate good evidence, to bring that to bear, and hopefully to influence the decision-making process. That's not always the case. Obviously, politics is a complex game, and sometimes jokingly with their students say, researchers are from Venus and politicians are from Mars, or whatever way you want to put it. In other words, we're slightly dancing to different tunes in that the accountabilities we have and what it is we're rewarded for are kind of different, and they're slightly different dynamics. So we're always looking for ways to make that impact. And one of the kind of big ways, I suppose, that's happened a lot in the researchy world, and if you look at things like the Health Research Board and how their funding is around this whole area of co-production of research. So the idea is that you bring the research and the practice loops a little bit as closer together, and you try to create a conversation, a joined up conversation, rather than a siloed or disconnected conversation. And, nowadays we will always kind of have to be able to articulate, well, what's the path to action for this knowledge that I want you to fund me to create. So, our impact is, we try to do very applied, very practical stuff, but we also try to be well networked and in the conversations with those people who are decision makers. And we talk about evidence-informed decision-making, just in recognition of the fact that certainly the sort of stuff we look at, like health systems reform, health policy development, all that kind of thing, that it's in a complex, unreliable, what is it, the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, I think it is, world. And that, there are a lot of different factors to play. So impact is a big part of it. That's what we try to do. I suppose it's like all these things, we do our bit. We educate as well as we can. We hopefully generate good quality research. And then we also try to create the links and the loops so that those conversations can be happening in an ongoing way. And I mean, maybe, in very practical terms, one of our projects is designed as a co-production of looking at how COVID is a facilitator or a boundary to Slainte Care implementation. And that's a project called the Foundations Project, and it's led by one of my colleagues, Sarah Barry, is the principal investigator of that. And the co-applicants on that project, that's kind of techno speak, but the co-applicants are the Department of Health and the HSE. So, it's built in from the get-go. In fact, they leverage some funding into the project as well, so that it really is a shared initiative in the hope that actually can make that impact, make a difference.
And while we're talking about COVID, was it the biggest and most colossal failure of society that we didn't get a handle on it and we didn't do the right things, and this thing ended up traveling everywhere? Despite the simple principle of just separating people for a short while, we couldn't do it. And if you gave it to a bunch of students and you gave them this problem, there's a little bit of a disease, it'll just pass from person to person, and the way it stops is that you just separate them. So off you go, stop it from spreading and just manage this project. For me, and I'm not sure if you've seen that movie that's on Netflix that everyone's talking about, Don't Look Up.
I have, actually. We watched it just last weekend, actually.
Was this the biggest failure of society globally in managing this thing that in a way was quite a simple problem? Or am I just being a little bit too narrow when I view it through those eyes?
You've sparked a couple of thoughts while I was listening to you there. I'd start off, first of all, saying I'll put on my organizational learning hat first. So what I would say is, in living memory, none of us had ever been here before. Yes, there have been epidemics, but nothing like the scale of this. So I think there's a lot of positives, but there was a lot of mistakes made in the early stages. And I think there was this sense of, for me, I kind of, a massive learning curve. And, when you're at that bottom of the learning curve, you really don't know. I think it was incumbent on people to make decisions that I think they didn't feel they had the understanding, the knowledge, even just using that actually hierarchy, the data, the knowledge, the understanding, maybe the wisdom, Now, on the other hand, could you say, well, they should have known? And maybe in some cases we should have. And there definitely have been failures. I think, one of the very obvious ones is in the nursing homes, how people were discharged from hospitals back into nursing homes. And, I think it's got to be one of the big failures, but not just in the Irish context, but more broadly. I wonder, if you put the students, unfortunately, we weren't in a lab and it wasn't a project. So I'm back to my none of us had ever been here before. I think the Don't Look Up movie, what it brings out is, I suppose, the believability, that sense of we're all there in our own kind of little silos and bubbles. And, the Spaniards have a great phrase. They say, cada loca con su tema, which kind of means every crazy one with their own little team, their own little kind of project or perspective. You know what, it struck me when I was listening to you asking that question, I was kind of thinking about democratic deficit that we talk about. And, that sense of, solidarity and togetherness. I mean, you were talking about Klopp there earlier on in our conversation, and the solidarity. And we see it still playing today in terms of the global vaccination program and how slow that is. And, we are all in this together, So was it a massive failure? You could say yes, in some ways. I think I probably would err on the side of maybe giving us all a little break on the basis that we were never here before. I mean, you said there a minute ago, we all thought it was going to be 3. I actually remember having that thought. I remember, the last Friday we met with some neighbours here and we went for a bite to eat in Carrick-on-Shannon and a pint afterwards. And I remember coming home and kind of thinking, oh golly, should we have done that? And then thinking, oh well, listen, this will only be 2 or 3 weeks. I actually remember having that thought in my naivety and innocence, I think there is a believability thing. When something is so outside your realm of experience, it's very hard to kind of engage with it or take it seriously. And, I don't know. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning there that sweet spot. I think it was, when we were chatting earlier, that sweet spot with your own team there of a moment. And there was in that early, that moment, early stage, sort of March, April, May, where the radio was full of people running to knock on each other's doors and help each other out. And there was that sweet spot moment. And I mean, there was an amazing kind of solidarity shown in there. But I think for me, there was a certain level of novelty to all of that. I imagine it was kind of the way it was for people during the Blitz.
There was a giddiness about it, wasn't there, nearly?
Giddiness, but also a kind of a sense of this was so extraordinary that you did kind of, I remember, having Leo Varadkar there, maybe not the New York speech, but the next one he did at government buildings. I think it was at 6:00, everybody went to see this and you had this sense of you were in a film set or something, this was so
totally.
Maybe I would bank for huge failures, but I'd also think give us all a bit of a break. We'd never been here before.
You're studying different health systems and comparing different places. And
yeah,
it's not like we didn't have the evidence. You could see what they did in New Zealand.
Yes.
And if we all did that for a small period of time, COVID was gone.
That's true, but I go back to my democratic deficit in that, you got to have the leadership and you got to have the agreement. Remember when the pandemic, hit here, we had just had a general election. We had a kind of a sitting government, but they had actually, for all intents and purposes, lost their power. There was a lot of other stuff kind of happening. You kind of need to have the ability to have strong decision making. I think that, I'm just calling them a sitting government at the time. They got a lot of public buy-in. They got a lot of the population kind of went along. But, you had all that period of trying to make a government. All of that was happening. And I suppose I sort of feel, once we got past the first shock, maybe, then getting everybody on the same page, getting people to agree, there's this whole interesting kind of dynamic that's playing out between, is it NEFIT or is it the cabinet, or who are the real decision makers? At the beginning, everybody was just like Tony Holohan was a kind of a god, and he would appear every night on the telly, and that was sort of. But after a while, that begins to shift, and there was a pushback on that. And I suppose, you could look to other countries, but we do compare health systems and everything, and the context matters, and it's not the same in every place.
Yeah,
and now maybe I'm too easy.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a colossal failure here. I think Ireland pretty much took a great line on everything. We pretty much did and achieved what New Zealand did, but it just went on a little bit too long, and those doors opened and those restrictions had to be relaxed.
I think the travel restriction thing was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And also, remember, we were very closely connected and right beside a very, a jurisdiction that took a very different approach to us, and we couldn't isolate ourselves from what was happening in the UK.
Yeah, totally.
For loads of reasons.
And isn't it funny, around such an important life or death thing, I need you to get on the agenda with this simple problem, and I need you, my next door neighbor, to do the same, and I need the next door neighbor to do the same. And if we all just do the same around this problem that was really quite straightforward, it's spreading from person to person. It requires us all to behave. We have the evidence. If we all just behave in the same way at the same time, we'll crack this. But we just couldn't.
We couldn't. And if I could be a bit esoteric for a moment, or maybe a bit Pollyanna, one of the things I liked about what was it called? Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up, yeah.
One of the things I liked about it was that, obviously in parody mode, but it was highlighting that very dynamic, that we couldn't look beyond our own bubble.
We couldn't
right?
help ourselves.
We couldn't help ourselves, exactly. And essentially, that's a great term because it can be double entendred and thought about in lots of interesting ways. One of the things I really think about when I think about the future, I think about how can we find a new politics, a politics that isn't, and this is the bit that's the Pollyanna bit, it's a politics that's based on collaboration rather than competition. I'm not a political scientist, and I'm sure there's fantastic research and work going on in this area. And I know there's obviously loads of projects, but I suppose, and some people would say that's a load of bunkum. But I think, broadening the crisis level a bit more, when we look at the whole climate issue, which Don't Look Up was kind of obviously reflecting on to some extent, I think the younger generations they're definitely looking for a different politics. They're definitely looking for a new way of thinking that is more collaborative. I mean, I'm convinced there was a word of the 20th century. What was the kind of word of the 20th century? Maybe you could say progress, but a couple of world wars and all the rest of it, maybe not. I don't know. But certainly technological explosion. Maybe that's what but for the 21st century, I'm absolutely and utterly convinced that the word is connectivity, that it's connection. And I think our politics are out of date. And maybe where we're seeing this push to the right in so many places and this drive towards individualism and small state and the sort of post-Trumpian or the Trumpian America and broader, and seeing it in Central Europe and things like this. I suppose maybe in my Pollyanna mode, I hope it's the dying embers of a certain form of politics where I kind of think sometimes there's a lashback when you're going to get a transformational change. Now, what the hell that looks like, and you can fire back to me and say, Sarah, you really have gone into your philosopher sitting in a chair mode there. That's fine. But when I try to tap into my hope, I kind of think of that, and I see it on the kind of micro or small scale. When you do actually. The problem is it takes time and it's not soundbitey, and certainly for, Morning Ireland, it won't do. But actually where you are serious about participation and engagement with various stakeholders and you give people an opportunity and you resource them to create their own language and come to a shared reality that's kind of socialized and understood and people can buy into, it actually is so powerful. So yeah, that's Sarah on, happy pills. My hope is around that. So I don't know if that's linked to COVID. Maybe the failure was that we couldn't find that connectivity. We're not there yet.
Yeah, and even though it was around life or death issues, which I found was amazing. Brass tacks here, we're not arguing about weird things and power and everything. This is about lives. And
yes.
When it was something so basic, and in a way I thought very simple, we still couldn't manage it, and it's just amazing. And you think if there was something more serious, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm not treating COVID as being serious, but if you could something that was really, really serious, that you really needed to rely on organizations and leaders to come together with a clear focus and put politics out of it. And just like that movie, Don't Look Up, I'm not sure if we have it in us.
No, well, look, I mean, you don't need to look too far. Look at COP.
Yeah.
Look what happened in the summer.
Yeah.
Consensus wasn't reached, essentially. And we're kind of push on to the next round,
Yeah, totally. You've Joe Manchin in the States who can hold up the whole American agenda because in his state, he happens to have, a lot of coal mines and everything else or whatever, a dependence on fossil fuels. And that's the end of that. That's America out of the equation. And in a way, from an organization point of view, like I know in the companies that I've managed when I was back in the day, I still manage a company, but where you've production and manufacture and sales and marketing and all that kind of thing. I was talking about performance management, and what you need for each section is a set of metrics to motivate each of the teams. But those metrics must be complementary. They must work in an overall context, and you have to construct them in that way. And I think when it comes to politics, that if we're all chasing a different goal, it's never going to work. That those goals have to be aligned. Those objectives have to be aligned. And if you can't, it's just never going to work. So in the work that you've been doing, and I know you're looking at health services and systems. Is that the problem that you're saying, or what are you identifying in your work?
Oh, well, I mean, as I said, one of the things that interests me a lot is we work on the implementation of Slainte Care, trying to understand if are we going forwards or are we going backwards. Having achieved, actually, speaking of consensus building, having achieved consensus on what is a vision for what we want the Irish Health and Social Care Service to look like, as articulated in Slainte Care. All the committee members signed up to it, and for the first time in the history of the state, we actually do have an articulation of a health policy that, at least on the face of it, everybody has agreed is the direction that we need to be going. And, I often say to my students, look, something like integrated care, it's like apple pie. You can't not like it, but it's the devil is in the detail, and how do you deliver it? So in principle, we have a vision. But of course, the challenge is the cherry picking and the different. So, we always are looking at trying to understand, the policy process and the ins and outs of that. In particular, I recently led on a paper on looking at the reorganisation of the Irish Health Service over the last 30 years. And identified a whole series of, nothing surprising, obviously, but, a sort of an evidence-based review of what a lot of those challenges have been. And, all the classic challenges there of, we have a system that's terribly fragmented. It's fragmented how it's grown incrementally, but also, and that brings a whole lot of kind of path dependency, as we call them, kind of issues where, if you want to get there, you wouldn't start here. That classic, how do you shift from where we're at to something different? And, what are the kind of levers that could actually make a difference? So that kind of complex, but also, fragmented in the way that lots of people, have different ideas about what is actually good for the health system or how it should be. We have a very strong acute sector and a not so strong community sector. There's a lot of very strongly established silos, both in terms of the identity of those various bodies, but also in terms of the way we actually operationalize and run the system. So we haven't got a kind of a joined up financial management system. We're developing one. The HSE is working on it, but, it's still a couple of years out, before we can get there. And there's resistance. There's resistance to actually coming in that joined up mechanism. The same, around information and data. As a researcher, for example, we're constantly, spooked by the fact that we don't have kind of comprehensive data sets. So it's really, really hard to work out, on some of the kind of more practical kind of questions we might have as a reason we don't knowing, well, what's the health need, in such and such an area or such and such across such and such a population, what's it going to look like, around information. So there's the kind of operational end of it. There's the political end of it. There's fragmentation in so many ways. And part of that, of course, is political will to deliver. That reorganization study that I was talking about there a few minutes ago sort of highlighted that in general, on the back of the formation of the HSE in 2004, 2005, this whole idea of bringing the community and the acute sectors, making them more aligned and trying to think through and things like how resources are allocated or how the workforce is managed, or, you could go through all the various different kind of functions that make up a health system and kind of try to say, well, how does that happen in an integrated way? That was kind of generally moving in a direction that, you sort of say, well, the juggernaut was slowly going there. And then we had James Riley and the government of the time, abolished the board of the HSE, set up a directorate structure. The hospital groups came into play, the community health care organisations, more division, more siloisation, and kind of truncated that whole kind of direction in which the health system. And now we're back to it again with Slainte Care. We're back to saying we're now one of the hot topics is the regional health areas. And I get a bit frustrated when I hear people throwing off comments just in conversation or on the radio or whatever, saying, we're back to the health boards. And we're not actually. We're in a different place. But there's no doubt that the international evidence suggests that to deliver something like integrated care, which in simple terms means that if I or my mum or my dad or you or my child needs the care, we'll get it close to home in a community in a way that's appropriate and all the rest of it. And, when we go in to see our practitioner, we won't have to tell the same story 15 times because actually there'll be a health record that will kind of have that information to hand, and and the system will be able to count me as a unit financially, because there'll be a patient unique identifier that will, so that they can track me from cradle to grave, blah 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 blah. I mean, I could go on about this, but to do all of that, we can't do that from an office in Dr. Stevens across from Houston Station. I'm slightly being facetious, but we need a distributed governance mechanism where people can make decisions in the right places. That's what regional health is all about. So as you can see, I'm exercised about this because it drives me mad. It's so easy to just throw off these tropes, just fling out a kind of an easy kind of soundbite argument without actually really thinking about the nature of the problem.
So I'm going to ask you
what it is you're trying to do. So sorry, I'm getting excited now.
No, but that's good. This is your passion, clearly, and that's cool. I want to ask you a simple question.
Mm-hmm.
You're at the meetings, you were part of the process.
Yes.
You were part of the reporting. So between the will and the thinking and the strategy and the intelligence and all of that, do you have hope?
Yes, of course I have hope, Greg.
Okay, good.
I have loads of hope. Loads of it.
And that's not you just being a positive person. It's because, I trusted the people I was sitting down with.
I've hope. So I'll continue on the theme of integrated care, right? Which is my research area and what I'm interested in, etc. So I've worked for about the last 3 or 4 years on and off with the integrated care program for older persons, right? Which is a national program as part of the HSE. And the things that those amazing people are doing are extraordinary. You could also look at a lot of although I had a little bit of a problem with the idea of a Slainte Care fund, but anyway, but the projects themselves, what people are doing, there's extraordinary difference being made in extraordinary ways in people's lives. We as a population don't know enough about this stuff. And the challenge as a bigger health system is the spread and scale of these kind of pockets of excellence and pockets of real learning and development. That's our challenge. We've a difficulty, as I said, that maybe why I'd go back to the kind of why I believe in the regional piece. Now, it's hard to get it right. And it's so easy to get it wrong, and why we moved away from health boards in the first place, right? The scalability kind of question is really challenging because a lot of our very, very, very institutionalized and strongly established patterns of ways of working and behaviors and, vesting, that lack of that solidarity that we were talking about earlier, that global vision that Slainte Care tries to be. You know what? No, I won't. I was going to say, power is taken, not given. You need to, so you need to kind of empower people. So listen, I mean, the spread and scale thing is very hard, and that's why, on a continuous basis, I really want to do more research on integrated care at scale and trying to crack the nut of some of those institutional and organizational problems. And I was looking for funding to do this project there earlier in the year, and I haven't won the funding yet, but I'm going to keep banging on that to see if somebody will fund me to do that work. But nonetheless, I have hope because there are tremendous pockets of excellence, and I suppose ultimately you'd have to say because of the people. I also have a kind of a view on change, which I had an experience years and years ago, and I often talk about it to my students, and it was extraordinary experience. I think it was kind of a real marker for me in my life about the hope question. And I was down at a conference in Ennis in County Clare. I think it was in Ennis. And it was called CAFIN. Don't know if you've ever heard of the CAFIN. Don't even know if they still run, but it's it was a guy called, I think his name is Harry Bowen. I think he sort of brought all kinds of people, quite visionary in its moment. But anyway, I can't tell you the date. If I did a bit of hunting, I could, but probably around the 2000s, something like that. And Emily O'Reilly, who was the ombudsman at the time in Ireland, I think she was, don't think she'd moved on to her European role at that stage. And she gave this speech anyway at the CAFIN conference. And she started out by saying, please, everybody in the audience here today, there's about 200 or 300 people there. And she said, please all imagine that you are sitting here in Ireland let's imagine it was in the year 2000. She said, I think it was a bit earlier. Anyway, she said, imagine it's the year 2020. And she kind of did a little bit of kind of context building into the almost, sort of put us there. And she basically read from the new present a kind of a retrospective of where we were at. And it was extraordinary. I've never seen a speech like it. I actually have it somewhere in a book, and it was an extraordinary speech. But I remember there was, you'll know this now as a broadcaster or a media person, when you make that connection and you get a kind of a tingly feeling, and that ripple goes through the communication, and it just, something shifts. Well, there was a moment like that where suddenly people had a vision of change, and how actually it does happen. We're not in the same place. I suppose I'm back to T.S. Eliot. And I remember at the end when she finished, the room exploded. It was a very, what was it about it for me? Maybe it was just one of those moments where somebody helped me to see that change really does happen, and you keep plugging away. And also that last piece on changes, maybe it's the educator in me. You're like that thing in the seed, the plower goes out to plow and you throw the seeds, and it's not always it's not always our benefit or our privilege to see the impact or the change that we make. Maybe that's...
Yeah, but you need to believe that what you're doing is making a difference, because it's tough work if you feel that's not the case.
Yeah. And look, on the last one on this, we were working with a group of PhD students yesterday, myself and Sarah Burke, my colleague, and we were talking about the management challenges in the health service, and it could all get very gloomy and doomy and all the rest of it. But, this question more or less exactly arose in that conversation. And Sarah was very interesting. She was really adamant. She said, we're not in the same place we were 20 years ago. We are now having a realistic conversation about universal healthcare in Ireland. It wasn't even on the page. We might be in our own little silo, but it's government policy. Now, how we get there is a whole other question, but we're not in the same place, or we're not in the same place, to be very practical about it. We're not in the same place with cancer care as we were 20, 25 years ago. Absolutely not. Our outcomes are much, much better. So if you want to go down that route, so I've given two examples, one a bit more policy and one quite operational and practical and making a real difference in people's lives.
If you're an average person who's unfortunate to get sick for a period of time, which country would you like to be in?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
There you go.
Well, if I were really honest, for access, not Ireland.
Okay.
We have a 2-tiered system, and we have a huge, big, long waiting list, and we have all kinds of barriers to access. So you'll hear the common story. Once you're in, you'll get fantastic care. So for access, not Ireland. Just to kind of put the brakes on my hope, we have, we're really, really challenged. And part of that challenge is capacity and resourcing. But a big part of it is also us having the political will. And I mean us, because I actually think we have the politicians that we want. And they make the decisions, because one thing politicians are brilliant at is listening to the voice of those around them and the people. So I think access. For care, I think Ireland is pretty damn good in a lot of ways. We always have our failings, but we have amazing people. Access, not so. I believe we should have a universal healthcare system.
And is there a perfect model for that? Could you pick a country?
A perfect model? No, perfection isn't for this life, Greg. But you mentioned there New Zealand, where there's, in fact, they came over from Canterbury and gave a couple of masterclasses in the Department of Health there a while back before COVID around how do we implement integrated care. They've done amazing stuff in Canterbury, and Canada is probably, although none of them are perfect. The NHS, I suppose you would say, there's the access to the care, but they've hacked away at it a lot. Successive Conservative governments have hacked away from the original vision, I think, in a lot of ways. So they've waiting lists, huge waiting problems, etc. Yeah, I believe in a universal healthcare system. I think we probably have to find a way to an Irish version of that.
Does anyone look at that as a metric? With all of the studies and everything, is there a metric that's, and I really mean that as a basic thing, an average person who's unlucky enough to get really sick, where would you want to be? Where would you be lucky enough to live and be a citizen of? And is there nearly like league table that we look towards for best practice?
For best practice, I mean, there's a lot of comparative stuff. The WHO, not just in general, but they have a European, for example, there's health systems, strengthening, there's kind of various iterations of monitors that will be looking at, I mean, the starting point for us would be always go look for WHO data around, is it specifically that question? Where would you like to be? It's a great question.
Yeah.
There's various different indices on health outcomes. Coverage is another key indicator, how people can get access. But just off the top of my head, I can't quote that around that particular question specifically.
Okay. No.
But it's a great question.
Yeah. And in a way, it's when it comes to an important thing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's something we probably should have the answer to in many respects. Tell me about France.
About France?
Yeah.
I love France.
I know you love France. Tell me a bit more about France and the French excursion.
The French excursion. So look, I'm in the very lucky position of being able to go and spend a bit of time in France during the year. We have a place there, which is fantastic down in Southwest. I love the food. I love the people. I love just the opportunity it gives me to disconnect. I like the weather, particularly, although it can be very, very cold. But, at the right time of the year, you get a nice blast of sun, as they say. And just, what it affords, probably more than anything, why I love it, is it just affords an opportunity for living outdoors for a bit longer. I mean, we do our best here in Leitrim. And actually, in a month or two, we'll be coming into the most beautiful time of year in this part of the world, which I do love, is the spring. And it's glorious. But you do just get longer with warmer weather.
And something that I love about you and Margot, and that we've all done that thing when we're away, and when you're having a great time, you just happen to look at the auctioneer's windows, in a particular place.
That was the problem. Yeah, we were going on holidays. We just kind of went to France. Margot spends a lot of time traveling for work. This is kind of a long way around to it, but I'll try and get there fast. Margot spends a lot of time traveling for work. She got a global role, so she spends loads of times, less so obviously in COVID, although quite back to it now, but a lot of time in airports and on airplanes. So we kind of started out saying, well, look, when we're going on holidays, we don't want to do the whole planes and airports thing. So the obvious thing was take the boat and go down to France and go for a drive. And so anyway, over various trips in that direction, we ended up down in the Southwest holidaying, and we rented the same place for a couple of years in a row, about 4 or 5 years. And as you do, you kind of start going, woo. And, the first time we kind of went, woo, we said, no, too much hassle. And, everybody says, no, it's not a good idea. And this, that, and the other. And we convinced us. But then after one of the holidays where we had found ourselves literally spending a week going to the estate agents and meeting them and getting them to get us to see places and everything, there was a kind of an element of wake up and smell the coffee. So we kind of, and literally it kind of just, it didn't just happen. Obviously, you kind of make decisions and choices. But we were just about to leave a couple of years ago and come home. And this very, very clever estate agent said to us, I've you just might like to come and see this place. And we literally went along and saw it. I wasn't that keen actually on our morning visit to it, but we went, there was nothing wrong with it, but it was probably a little more modern than I was kind of thinking about originally. But it was, it was small, it wasn't big, it was manageable, it ticked a lot of boxes. We went off and had lunch. And Margot said to me, think about this, think about that, think about the other. We rang the estate agent and said, well, maybe we'll come back in the afternoon. And of course, he was hot out to the to the property again, And we had a second look. And literally as we were leaving, we kind of said, maybe, look, just kind of test the water on an offer. We actually were just throwing it out there. The next day we were on driving to Cherbourg and on a boat home and, whatever. It was a Friday or a Saturday. And by Sunday evening, we got an email from him saying, the vendors have accepted your offer. And we're like, oh my God.
Oh, shit.
Oh dear God, what have we done?
Now we have
And
to
you
do
know,
it.
it kind of takes it. But you know what? It's a fantastic. I often say, "Vive la République," because we applied for a mortgage. We had to get a mortgage in France, and it's an extraordinary country for mortgages. There's a heck of a lot. It took us months to hop through the hoops, so it wasn't for the faint-hearted. We got a little bit of help to go through the process, but once you're there, oh my goodness me, you just get, 20-year fixed rate mortgage, like, whatever in, what's this, 2022. So in, 2030, I can tell you on, January exactly what my mortgage payment will be, and, very much protecting the buyer and the homeowner. So, so we started going through the process, and suddenly you realize, actually, this is doable. This is actually possible. And and look, it's been obviously a bit challenging with COVID, and we haven't been able to go as much as we might have liked, etc. But we're coming out the other end of that curve, and we've made great friends there.
You two will make friends anywhere. I'm just saying. But it doesn't matter. Just drop you in anywhere. It absolutely does not matter.
Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. But yeah, no, we've met some really, really wonderful, wonderful people. In fact, as I speak right here, I have up on the shelf, I'll show it to you, I have a beautiful painting. It's kind of abstract painting. So our neighbour who lives right across the road on this little lane where the house is, he's an artist, an English artist. And he's been living in France for about 30, 35 years, himself and his wife. And anyway, last year, when we were there, I helped them kind of come into the digital 21st century and help sort out all their internet problems and got them up and running, and, got him, he was able to speak to his sons on FaceTime and blah, blah, blah. Even managed to get an Alexa going so he can listen. He's 87, so he can listen
brilliant.
to his classical
My mum was
music.
86, and she, when she discovered how to forward jokes and videos on WhatsApp, it's just like, it's changed her life, literally.
Yeah, exactly. So I was delighted to do that, and we did it kind of over the summer and whatnot. But one of the things that he gave me, you really won't see it, but he gave me this beautiful painting of his. He's an abstract artist, quite abstract sort of stuff, but and it's all about Icarus. The Fall of Icarus, it's called, etc. And I'm going to put it up here at my work desk somewhere.
Fantastic.
But do you know what? Just wonderful people, life enriching. Look, I'm extraordinarily lucky.
I was going to say, Sarah, that doesn't look a bit like you.
No, it doesn't.
So I better let you go, but I've got a few questions before I go there. What's happiness to you?
Okay, I actually can answer this one very succinctly.
Oh.
I can, because I've thought about it a lot in my life. So happiness to me is being able to make your contribution.
Okay. You mean to society?
Anywhere, to your family, to your society. I think a lot of unhappiness comes from a lack of confidence or a lack of opportunity or a lack of, I suppose it comes from my belief that we've got something positive to give. Yeah. That's the nature of a human being, in my view. Somebody put it to me once, when your talent meets the needs around you, but getting that synchronicity, and it is a synchronicity at times, a lot of the time. So being able to make your contribution, to me,
that's fantastic.
That's my definition of happiness. Yeah. And I've thought about it a lot at various times in my life.
I had a beautiful man from Canada called Paul Byrne from the Tamarack Institute in Canada. They do a lot of change management work and communities solving problems and stuff. Yeah, you're now hearing Bert. He said community is acts of caring done over and over and over. And it was just a simple thing. And I think, that's fantastic. Next question. I talk about this idea of winning happy. So we know what happiness is, but in life, I think, you might love doing a particular thing. And the analogy I give is that you might love playing football. But if there were no goalposts, it would seem a little bit pointless after a while.
Sure.
What are your goalposts?
As a self-proclaimed accidental academic, I still feel the desire to win that grant where I'm the principal investigator, and it's about that stuff I was talking to you about. It's about finding new ways of linking and collaborating so that we can do the things we want to do to make a better health system for us all. And I believe I have a unique contribution in that space. And I haven't managed yet to convince a funder that I have the vision and I haven't articulated the project in such a way that somebody has agreed to fund me. So, and some of that is because of my own busyness and having the time to really, go out there and get it. And some of it it's about finding the articulation, finding the rationale and the kind of the capture of the problem and the project in a way that is recognizable and accessible. So yeah, they're the goalposts for me professionally.
Yeah.
Personally, maybe other things, but professionally. And I would love to not leave that one behind.
Okay. And I think that's in fairly safe hands with Sarah.
Well, I don't know. But anyway, I haven't convinced anyone yet, but I'll hopefully get there.
It's funny, you mentioned...
Try again.
You mentioned something about time. I had a particular thought today. I was delivering some training to a bunch of researchers, ironically. And I was told in advance, listen, these guys are really, really busy. So your normal training time, you need to cut that back. And of course, they're very clever and they're very this and they're very that. And I delivered the session in as best I could in the time that was allocated. But I know myself, I devised that training in the first place and I know how much time it takes. And because they're special and they're researchers and I was told their time was so precious, I cut it back. And I kind of arrived at a conclusion in that the people who don't have the time are the ones who need to give these types of things even more time. Because what I was delivering in their hands, it'll be so much more powerful. And they needed to give it time. So time is such a tricky thing. And
it is, yeah.
Yeah. And, I think you were saying if you had more time, and I think you were probably the best person on that earth to give more time to it, but it's so finite. What can we do with it? And yeah, it's just a weird thing. Sorry, I went off.
No, it's that classic. I mean, what's the word? Tangles up our healthcare professionals and decision makers all the time. But it's that classic. The priority is what shouts loudest is the urgent, and it's never getting to the important. And listen, that's a well-known phrase, but it is that challenge to create the reflective space.
Now, I've got one last whopper of a question. Actually, before I ask the big whopper, the big whopper, there's 2 guitars behind you.
Yes.
If you were to pick up a guitar, knocking back some lovely Bordeaux wine in France, what would you sing?
What would I sing? Oh, a bit of Neil Young, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, okay. Which one?
I love Old Man Sitting by the Side of the Road. Etc., etc., etc. I'm terrible on words. Margot's brilliant on words. I can sing. Well, hopefully enough. Well enough. But I always have to have the words in front of me. Margot's amazing. Like, she can pull out the lyrics she can't sing for peanuts, but she can have the words.
Okay, so
but anyway, probably Neil Young, Joan Baez, one of those.
The next time we get together in person, let it be with a few bottles of wine and that guitar, and you can sing all night, and whether you can sing or not, I'll quite happily listen to you. So the whopper of a question.
The whopper.
What was your best day?
Ooh, goodness. I can answer that. It comes into my head straight away.
Whoa.
Yes, straight away, without a shadow of a doubt. Because it was a long journey and you were at the end. So I don't know if you don't have time, but I could just maybe give you a very quick answer. The best day of my life was the day that Margot and I had our civil partnership.
Fantastic.
We had it in Carrick-on-Shannon in the dock. We had the ceremony in one of the art galleries in the dock, and we had the reception in the other art gallery. It was before the referendum, so we subsequently got married, but that was just to be polite to the Irish population who came out and voted for us. But in my heart, our day was our civil partnership. And it was so important to me that it was a public occasion that our relationship was recognised by the state, and that by hook or by crook, we managed to do it in a public building, recognised by a functionary of the state. And that was, and look, there was just so many wonderful things about it, but that was my best day. My mum gave the most extraordinary speech at that occasion. Everybody who was there was like 100% there because it was so unusual. And so they were all kind of, if anything, curious, but they were just so happy. They were just so happy to be there. And yeah, I'll never forget the energy of that moment. And there isn't time for all the twists and turns of our lives, but I nearly got married once before.
Oh, did you? No. Whoa, excuse me. This is podcast number 2. I never heard that part.
And to a man. So that's a whole story.
But Jesus. Anyway. Okay, we're now officially in another podcast. Sarah Barry, welcome to the Win Happy podcast. You've got a story to tell. Go.
Because I had stepped back from it once, I absolutely and utterly knew what it felt like to be sure.
Yeah.
And that was a tremendous feeling. So for loads and loads of reasons, and many more I could iterate, it was absolutely the best day of my life.
Fantastic. And do you know, you're a beautiful couple. And we can't wait to see you again.
Likewise.
France, maybe, I don't know.
Exactly. Now you're talking, Greg.
Even Leitrim will do me at this stage. I'm all in.
Well, that's easy to arrange.
Yeah, exactly.
That's if we can get you out of the Republic, of course.
Sarah, thank you so much for the pleasure of your company. I overstayed my welcome big time.
It was really nice to chat with you, Greg.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And continue to win happy.
Oh, thank you. I like the concept. Yeah. Very good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.